For the first time since she was acquitted for the murder of her daughter, Casey Anthony finally speaks up and tells her version of the story in a brand new documentary titled Casey Anthony: Where the Truth Lies. But what do her body language, facial expressions, and word choice reveal? Are these the words and emotions of a grieving mother? Is there more to this story that she's still concealing to this day? And why did this particular scene tell me everything I need to know about what she's really thinking? Let's dive right in. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and TV shows all over the world. Now, first and foremost, before we jump into today's analysis, I just want to thank you all for the messages and comments I've been getting. I know that I took a bit of a hiatus. There was a lot going on. For those of you who aren't updated on what was happening, please check the community post. In fact, whenever I'm not posting or whenever you're wondering what topics I'll be covering, just head over to the community posts on this channel because I'm usually pretty good at updating the viewers on what's going on, why I'm not posting, what's coming up. Speaking of comments and requests, in today's video, we are looking at, I think, the most requested topic in the history of the channel, Casey Anthony. So 10 years ago, Casey Anthony went to trial for a very, very bizarre case, and we're going to look at a lot of details today, where her daughter went missing, and then a month later, so she was missing for a whole month, the police got a phone call, and Casey Anthony, the mother of the missing child, had just some of the most bizarre behaviors. She just kept lying about the details of where her daughter was, when she saw her daughter, who she saw her with, and this was one of the most famous cases in American crime history. Anyways, the case went to trial and she was acquitted of murder. The jury found her not guilty. And for years, we didn't hear from her. She vanished off the face of this planet. But just last week, Peacock released a documentary where Casey Anthony finally told her version of the story. And there's a lot of testimony here. There's a lot of emotional moments. And in this video, we're gonna look at the details of her behavior and try to understand, are we getting the truth here, or are we getting some sort of fabrication that she's trying to sell, a narrative that she's trying to sell? Now, before we look at these clips and break down the behavior and try to figure out what's going on, I want to tell you that there are 5 specific reasons why it's very difficult to try to figure out the absolute truth using this documentary as a resource. There are 5 reasons, 5 challenges. I'll start by giving you one of them right now. There is a ton of research, and I will leave a bunch of links in the description where you can go check this out, and they've shown again and again and again how flawed our memory is. Our memory is built for survival and practicality, not for perfect accuracy. So there are very good chances that if you have memories from your childhood or from a couple of years ago, and you compare it with someone else who was there, there's going to be very big differences, even if you can both swear that you remember it in great detail. We don't remember things in detail the way we think we do. And despite popular belief, our memory is even more flawed with traumatic experiences. Because your brain is trying to survive and is trying to do what it needs to survive, it doesn't give that much of its attention to your ability to memorize details. This is why in police lineups, you know, when they line people up and have witnesses try to figure out who was there, there's a giant margin of error. There are a lot of people wrongfully accused of crimes because witnesses misidentified them in the lineup, and now as they thought back to the event, they took the person that they saw in the lineup and kind of injected them into that memory. Anyways, all this to say that throughout this documentary, we have to keep in mind that Casey is talking about events that happened at least 10 years ago. Because when she's talking about her daughter, that's 10 years ago. When she's talking about her own childhood, that's even further. So I'm constantly going to keep in the back of my mind that everything she's saying, even if she herself is convinced is truthful, may not reflect the truthful sequence of events, just her memory of it. All right, with that in mind, let's jump right into these scenes. Oh, and by the way, because the documentary was in 3 episodes, I'm also going to be making 3 videos because there's just so much going on in each one. So in this video today, we're only looking at clips from the first episode. So there are certain things that I will analyze based on the way it's presented only in this episode, but then she'll go on to elaborate on them in episodes 2 and 3. And so I will elaborate on them in my second and third video.
Kaylee was just a few months old here. I've had this up since 2005, and it's gone with me everywhere I've gone. So she's running around, screaming, having the time of her life on my mom's porch, and I asked her to stop so I could get a picture, and she does this. This makes this face. I was with her when she did this. We broke probably every single one of these crayons. Those moments were happy, innocent. There was no trauma. There was no darkness in those moments.
Okay, a lot going on there right in the beginning, including the most important line for me from this entire episode. Now, as my regular viewers know, I love to look at decisions, because when we do behavioral analysis, we're looking at subconscious things, the facial expressions, the gestures. In an overwhelming majority of cases, we don't know that we're doing them. But I also like to look at conscious decisions that people make. As a mentalist, it's hardwired into the way I operate because it tells me a lot about a person. And here, Casey's showing us a lot of decisions. So the first thing that hit me caused a debate in my head with myself, because she's showing up to this location to film this documentary, and she has all these big framed pictures and artwork that Kaylee did when she was younger. And that struck me immediately because I've been on dozens of television sets, everything from reality shows to documentary to scripted TV. I've seen it all. And I've stayed in Airbnbs, hotels, houses that were rented by the production. And I've never seen anyone, not just me, I've never seen anyone bring these framed pictures to put in their room that they're staying in. I've never seen anyone do that. So that was my initial thought. But then I debated and said, okay, but hold on. She's here to film a documentary about her daughter. So it would make sense that she would bring pictures and artwork and all these things to talk about in the documentary. That does make a heck of a lot of sense. And I guess I would have been okay with it if it wasn't for her putting it up on the walls. And they're filming her like, it's not just here for the documentary to say like, look, here's a picture of Kaylee when she was younger. They're showing her putting these things up. Like, look how important it is for me I can't go anywhere. I can't sleep in a room if I don't have these things up on the wall, these photographs. So I feel like this is a decision that is trying to reflect a certain image. And the words she uses really convince me further that we're trying to be shown this image. So let's look at some of the language. Here are some sentences that jumped out at me. It's gone with me everywhere I've gone. So this is about that big frame. It's not like a little pocket picture in a wallet. It's a big thing. It's gone with me everywhere I've gone. Here she is having the time of her life, Then when she shows the crayon, the artwork, I was with her when she did this. She could have shown that artwork and just said, here's something Kaylee did, but it was important for her to say, I was with her when she did this. She's selling this narrative of we were together, we were happy, innocent. That's an interesting choice of words. Those moments were happy, innocent. It's also more than just the words she's saying, but the way she's saying it too. Like if we listen to the tonality, there's something that happens several times, but twice it's really noticeable. One is when she's hanging up the frame and she says, since 2005, there's a pause and she goes, since 2005.
Since 2005.
And then she does the exact same thing when she's talking about the crayons. We broke every one of those crayons.
We broke probably every single one of these crayons.
There's this giggle in there. Now that giggle, that pause with that kind of breathy chuckle as you're speaking, is actually taught to actors and actresses when they're reminiscing on pleasant things. Like you talk, you pause, and you do this. And I'm not saying she's acting, by the way. She could be pleasantly actually reminiscing, but it's just to me the tonality, like how overly emotional she is and she's laughing and pausing and she has these mid-sentence giggles and things like that. I think there's this really important narrative for her, for the production to say, you know, we were happy, she was having the time of her life, I was there with her, these are happy memories, I'm laughing mid-sentence because I'm remembering all these great times. Then she says something that is so important. She goes, there was no trauma, there was no darkness. So remember that. There was no trauma, there was no darkness. Put a pin in it, because there's something we're going to see later that once I heard that, made me come back to this moment, and it's huge how much importance it gives these words. So again, remember that. There was no trauma, there was no darkness.
But I'm still defending the fact that I didn't hurt her. I live it every single day. And no one can ever tell me I should just get over the fact that my daughter isn't here and I've been blamed for her being gone.
Okay, this is a great scene to talk about the second challenge that makes it really difficult to figure out if she's lying or telling the truth. And it's this. There's a lot of research that demonstrates that people who are telling the truth but fear not being believed, they're scared that people won't believe them, behave very, very similarly to people who are lying. And the reason for that is simple. Someone who's telling the truth and isn't really scared that no one's going to believe them just gives you the facts. They don't really care about how it's coming off or how they're being perceived or how truthful it feels because they're just laying down the facts. People who are lying, because they know their story isn't true, will often put more emphasis, more emotion, more detail. They'll really try to sell it because they know it's not true. Well, truth tellers who fear that they're not going to be believed might do the same thing. Because they think in their heads that you're not going to believe them, even if they're telling the truth, they might, give more details, put more emotion behind it, really try to sell it, and it might come off looking like a lie. And as such, if she's telling the truth, yeah, it absolutely sucks. It absolutely sucks that her behaviors are really bizarre and she did a lot of really weird things and she continues to do weird things that make me look at it and go, I'm really not sure. I want to ask a lot more questions here. But if, despite all that, she's telling the truth, it absolutely sucks that she lost her daughter and she's being blamed for it. I can resonate with that. I can feel for that. And I can still point out behaviors that look sus to me. So let's look at some of those behaviors. First, and I know a lot of you heard this, she says, I didn't hurt her. Now this is a classic example of psychological distancing. Psychological distancing is any time we use words that are less bad than the actual situation. No one's saying you hurt your daughter. People are thinking you murdered your daughter. But she's not saying the word murder. So does this definitely mean she's guilty? No. However, psychological distancing is something that we often see in guilty people. Because they can't face the gruesomeness of what they did, because they don't identify as a murderer, they might use words that reflect them under a light that is much less bad. So this is the kind of thing we might hear. Of course, it holds a lot more weight in a cluster of behavior. And again, it's not absolute. Is it possible that the reason she's using hurt is because she still doesn't want to use the word murder when talking about her daughter? It's absolutely possible. Just noting that there's some psychological distancing happening there. Let's look at the facial expressions. We are seeing things that are consistent with anger and sadness. We see the eyebrows dancing around a lot. They go from anger, which is down here, anger is the eyebrows go down and close together, to sadness, which is the inner corners of the eyebrows come together and go up, and we are seeing those real moments of sadness right there. And she goes back and forth between those two things a lot. We also see the anger in the jaw there. There's some tension in the jaw in the beginning when she's talking about how she has to defend the fact that she didn't hurt her. She's spitting those words a little bit. And again, then it relaxes and shifts to sadness. So we're getting a lot of anger, a lot of sadness. Her emotions are all over the place. But here's the thing that feels a little strange to me. Although her emotions are fluctuating a lot, her speech is very linear. If you just listen to that segment without looking at it, the whole thing flows. The whole thing is just one continuous thought. But the emotions are all over the place. And it's very rare to see that. Typically, when I see emotions fluctuating like that, the speech also fluctuates. You see it in the tone, you see it in the words. But here the speech is linear, the emotions are fluctuating. And this is something we often see in someone who's really trying to push this emotional thing. Look at how emotional this is making me. So I do feel like there's a bit of dramatization going on here. Now keep in mind what I said. It could very well be that she's very truthful here, but she knows that the viewers are suspicious, that they don't really believe her. She spent 10 years fighting accusations. So it's possible that the reason we're seeing this over dramatic thing is that she's really trying to sell the truth or what she believes to be true. With the eyebrows, with the sadness eyebrows where they come in together, there are moments where they do that and we're not seeing the activity in the upper forehead that we should, but there are moments where we definitely are. Like in this moment right here, we could see that line between the eyebrows coming straight down, and we could see those wiggly lines at the top that are dipping. So these are the things that we want to see in real sadness. The eyebrows going up like that, and by the way, that's really difficult to fake. It's really difficult to fake this. The eyebrows coming closer together and up like this without these fingers, obviously. So there are moments of this that are the real facial expression of sadness and anger. Finally, let's talk about one of my favorite topics and something you guys know I pay a lot of attention to, and it's that eyebrow flash. Whenever we're talking and those eyebrows go up for a quick second and come back down, this is something that there's a lot of research on. In fact, I have an entire video, it's a quick video, 3 minutes, where I talk about all the research and why we know the things we know about eyebrow flash. I go into a lot of detail. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to know the details as to why we know this, but eyebrow flash typically means one of three things. The first is emphasis. If I want to emphasize something. The second one is social approval, social connection, showing good intention. So you see someone, you know, hey, how are you? You know, anytime we're trying to connect with people. And the third one is surprise. So if something surprises you, the eyebrows go up, and it might be a quick second. It might be held there for a little bit longer. But essentially it comes down to this. Eyebrows flashing typically mean that something has our attention. So in all of those cases, emphasis, social connection, or surprise, something has our attention. So what's interesting with her in this clip is at the beginning of every single sentence she said, there's an eyebrow flash. And there is research that shows that when people are giving instructions, the eyebrows go up on the important instructions. And again, this is important. This should have your attention. Social approval, that can all play into that. So here with every sentence, we're getting that eyebrow flash. This is important. This is important. This is important. And again, that's reflected in the emotion here. Like everything I'm saying is so important. Listen to me. So she's giving everything a lot of importance, a lot of emphasis, trying to connect with the audience with every sentence. So that eyebrow flash is happening. There's one place where it happens where it's interesting. It's right at the end when she says, and I'm being blamed for her being gone. And we see that eyebrow flash right there. And again, right there, I think that's social approval and a display of innocence. Notice how if we're trying to convey to someone, hey, I'm good, like we're looking for approval and displaying that innocence, the eyebrows might go up. It's kind of like the hands. We're showing good intention. There's nothing to hide. So I think right there at the end, blamed for her being gone. There could be surprise, like I can't believe I'm being blamed for this. But I think it's more than likely that it's just a display of innocence. Okay, now we're going to go back and look at some of her earlier behaviors that have caused millions of people in the world to just be so suspicious of her behavior when her daughter went missing. Then we're going to look at the sentence that revealed the most to me about Casey Anthony from this first episode. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that like button. It really does help get this video out there. Hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more practical psychology content.
I called a little bit ago, the deputy sheriff said I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. Her mother finally admitted that she's been missing.
Okay, what is
here now?
Okay, what is the address that you're calling from?
We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. Hello?
Hi. Can you tell me a little bit what's going on?
My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
Who has her? Do you have a name?
Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. She's been my nanny for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years.
Okay, for clarity and context, basically what we just heard was the 911 call. So it wasn't Casey who called 911, it was her mother, Cindy, and you could hear her, she's hysterical, her granddaughter's missing. This is, by the way, a month after Kaylee had disappeared. Casey finally told Cindy that her daughter had been missing for a month. So Cindy's hysterical, she's on the phone, she's going nuts, and then she passes the phone to Casey. Now, for those of you who don't know the details of the case, everything she said in that phone call, in that recording, was a complete lie. So that name she gave for the nanny, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who she says she's been my nanny for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, is a complete lie. That's a woman she once met who is a nanny, but it's not her nanny. She's never been her nanny. Now, before I tell you why that's important for me, let's look at just one more scene here that happened after the call. So they called the cops showed up, and she told them that she works at Universal Studios. Here's what happened next.
That morning, Detective Melch went to Universal and found out that she wasn't an employee, she didn't work there. So I told him to stay there, and I would go pick her up and I would bring her to Universal. We would see what she would do, how she would react. And she's kind of waving at people, and they are waving back. I mean, but they're like, they're waving like, we actually turned down a hallway where there's nowhere to go. It's a dead-end hall. Casey turned and looked at us and said, I don't really work here. So.
Okay, so she makes up not only the nanny thing, but where she works, and to me that was always weird. Like, didn't she figure that they're easily going to figure out that that's not true? Anyways, and not only like when she's called out on it or she's asked, why don't you go show us, she really commits to it. She goes with them to Universal, walks into an office where she doesn't work, and walks in with them, waving to people. And then eventually when she realizes this is the end of the road, turns around and goes, I don't really work here. Now, the reason this is important for me is because it brings us to the third challenge when it comes to trying to figure out if Casey Anthony is being truthful or dishonest. And that's the fact that Casey Anthony is, or at the very least at some point was, a serious compulsive liar. Now, a compulsive or pathological liar is not a diagnosis. It's not a condition. It's not a disorder. It's a symptom that is often associated with certain psychological disorders. But she lies with great ease. I mean, look at the commitment there. You can hear it on the phone call. There's no hesitation. There's no kind of stammering. She just flat out talks about this woman who's been her nanny for 2 years, who isn't, then takes a bunch of cops to a place that she doesn't work, claiming she works there. She's waving to people. Listen, the reason that we can often see certain signs in someone they're being deceptive is because the deception, the lie, causes stress within them. So their behavior shifts, it changes. We see something that makes us want to ask more questions. But when someone can lie this easily, it's likely that they're going to be able to continue to lie without feeling guilt. I mean, this is someone who can lie about these massive things to the cops. It's very possible that she's going to be able to tell other lies, and I'm not going to see much.
It was the right guilty verdict. I did lie to law enforcement. I admitted that I lied to law enforcement. So I am a convicted liar. It's the truth.
And what is your relationship to truth and lying today?
I'm a little too honest. I'm blunt. I'm direct. Almost painfully so.
Whew, a lot going on there. So the number one thing that jumped out at me when I heard that was a marketing or persuasion strategy that is studied at great length and used by some of the biggest companies in the world. So if we look at one of the most successful cough syrups in the world, Buckley's, and we look at their slogan, it says, it tastes awful and it works. So they say that the cough syrup tastes awful, the taste is bad, but it works, it gets rid of your cold. And this is something that's been enormously successful. It's been the Buckley slogan for a very, very long time. And it's brilliant because nobody is looking for a cough syrup that tastes good. That's not our priority. We want cough syrup that works. So Buckley's found that in admitting their shortcoming, in saying, listen, it tastes awful, we're going to be blunt about that, you will trust more that they're being honest with you because they're blatantly showing their hand and saying it's not a good taste, but it works. This strategy was also famously used by Avis, the car rental company, who in the early 60s was being demolished by Hertz. In fact, they were losing millions of dollars a year. But they were able to shift that and for the first time be profitable by more than $1 million in their year when they came up with the slogan and the campaign, Avis is only number 2 in rent-a-cars, so we try harder. So once again, they confess their flaw. They go, we're not the best. We're second best. We know that. But we have to try harder for that. So again, it's the exact same psychology. I will admit my shortcomings. I will admit where I'm not the best, but in hopes that you'll believe this other part. You'll go with me on this other thing. So when I heard Casey Anthony say that, my mind went immediately to this strategy. For her to look at the fact that she told a bunch of lies in the beginning, she can't defend that. There's no defense for that. We know that she was lying. The jury found her guilty on those lies. So she goes, yeah, I lied. That was the right verdict. I lied about those things. Flat out. No justification, no excuse. That's a fact. I lied about those things. But I didn't kill my daughter. So I'll be honest about these things. The cough medicine tastes bad. We're number 2. But the cough medicine works. We try harder. I didn't kill my daughter. Immediately after that sentence, she says, it's the truth. And again, we get an interesting little cluster of behaviors. We get a shrug with the shoulders going up like this. We get a no gesture. The head now goes to no, from I'm a convicted liar to it's the truth. And a very small and subtle, very easy to miss lip compression. So we see the lips just very quickly kind of pucker just for a quick sec. So lip compression is disagreement or withheld opinion. So whenever you're talking to someone and you kind of see this kind of lip compression, sometimes it's a quick burst, sometimes they hold it for a little more. We're holding something in, we're holding something back, or disagreement. The no gesture, let's talk about no gestures. So a lot of people, this is another one of those big misconceptions in body language. They see this and they immediately think someone's lying. Oh, the head was shaking when they said something, they're clearly lying. That is a massive misconception. When someone is talking and you see this kind of gesture, or even listening and you see this kind of gesture, typically, not always, but typically, it means one of 4 things, and all 4 of them start with dis, D-I-S. So it's disbelief, disagreement, disapproval, or disappointment. So it doesn't always mean that we're lying or there's inner conflict. It can mean that, but not always. And then we have the shrug, and there's a lot of research done on shrugging, and it basically comes down to shrugging indicates a lack of something. I don't know, I don't care, I don't have anything to add, I don't know what to say, a loss of something. I don't something. So here when we look at it together, it's the truth and we're getting this. So there's so many ways to interpret this. It could be it's the truth, I don't have anything to add. So again, it could be like disapproval, or I'm a liar, I shouldn't have lied, I don't have anything more to say, I don't know what to tell you. So that cluster could be very consistent with, yeah, it is what it is, I don't know what to add to this. But I think it's more likely to be disagreement with that label. Like, I'm a liar, I don't really think I'm a liar. I think it's her inner struggle of going, yeah, I lied, I know I lied, it's on the record that I lied, I got convicted for lying, but I disagree that I'm a liar. So I think there's a bit of conflict there. I think there's a bit of disagreement, but it can also simply be just kind of like, I don't know what to add to that. I am in fact a liar. Let me know in the comments which one you think. Then she's asked what her relationship with the truth is now. And she goes, I'm blunt, I'm direct, almost painfully so. So she's had a big change. She's now an honest person. She doesn't lie the way she used to. So here we're getting a destination. She's telling us, I'm honest, I'm blunt to the point where it hurts, but we're not seeing that journey. We're not seeing why that happened or how that happened. So to me, it's kind of missing. So I'm having a hard time accepting, or at the very least, I'm having a hard time going, okay, I now believe that you are 100% honest all of the time. There's still that voice in my head going, yeah, but you lied about a lot of stuff. Why is it different now? Which brings us to the 4th challenge with this documentary and trying to figure out if Casey Anthony is being truthful. And that is the fact that this is a documentary. It's edited and there's no real interrogation. There are numerous moments where, as an interviewer, as an interrogator, I feel that whoever was asking her these questions should have dug a little more, pushed a little more, but they didn't. They just kind of let her present what she wants to present, and there's no real digging happening here, and it's edited. Whatever the production wants to show us, that's what we're being shown. So in this case, she's answering a question, and I would love to ask her more questions about this. What changed? Why are you now honest? Do you see the way you used to be? What do you think of the way you used to be? These are things I would love to ask her, but no one's asking her. So in this pursuit of trying to find the truth, sometimes you require those questions and they're just not happening.
I lost my entire life when I lost Kaylee. She was the only thing that truly and honestly mattered to me.
Okay, that scene caught my attention for 2 really quick reasons. The first one is there seems to be this kind of lull, this waiting. And you notice it from the side, she's kind of just waiting and she's looking at someone. She's waiting for a cue. And then it seems like the moment they go, okay, go, bam, she jumps right into the emotion. There's no build up. It's not like she starts talking and again, it could be the editing. Again, it's because there's a cut scene right before that happens, but right as it cuts, she's still waiting. They still caught that kind of, I'm waiting, and now I'm being told to go, boom, time to push my narrative, put my story out there. So she jumps right into that emotion instantly. And that's weird. Usually emotion kind of, it doesn't just boom, like there's kind of like a bit of a build or something gets you emotional. In this case, she's almost very calm. She's kind of waiting and then bam. And that to me kind of feels more like a scripted, like there's a clapper and the person goes and action and the person jumps right into it. And then the second thing is she was truly and honestly the only thing that mattered to me. So truly and honestly, these are called perception qualifiers. And again, it's very important to look at behaviors in context and baseline, because a lot of people use, honestly, frankly, truthfully, to be honest, as part of their regular vocabulary. It's always, they're always just using it freely. She doesn't use it very often. So I'm curious, first of all, she says both, like truly and honestly. So there's really this thing, you're like, she was truly and honestly the only thing that mattered to me. Why is it important for her to say truly and honestly? This is a documentary. Isn't everything you're saying supposed to be truthful and honest? So to me, it never holds that much weight, but it's always that little red flag as to why is it important for you here to be pushing this as being truly and honestly, she was the only thing that mattered to me. Why do I feel like that narrative is trying to be pushed on me? That's just a little red flag in my head that went off.
So let's go back to the beginning. July 16, 2008. The day that Kaylee's kidnapping is reported. What are you thinking and feeling on that call? There's no emotion.
There's nothing. Nothing.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's very weird. I was so numb during so much of that. I did meet someone named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. She was babysitter, was the nanny. All of that's true. Was not my nanny, was not my babysitter.
Okay, right in the beginning there, we have something fascinating, and it's, we see some grooming. We see a lot of grooming. Now, grooming is any gesture we make to fix our appearance to appear better. And it's consistent with stress, it's consistent with trying to present a certain narrative, but it's also very consistent with documentaries or any time somebody's in front of a camera. I guarantee you that if you take a look at most of these clips that I film for my YouTube videos, it typically begins with some sort of grooming. It's very, very common. The grooming isn't my issue here. The timing of the grooming is the issue here. Because here's what's happening. The camera's already on. In fact, earlier in the documentary, we see the clapper comes out, the clapper claps, she's grooming, and I had no problem with that. It's very common. She didn't groom with the beginning of the shot. She groomed with the beginning of the question. And that to me was important because she's sitting there, she's not thinking about her appearance yet. She knows the camera's on, she's looking at the camera, but the moment the interviewer asks about that day where her daughter was reported missing, this is it. And instead of her energy going this way, her energy goes this way. She's now self-aware. We're fixing the hair, we're fixing the shirt, we're fixing a bunch of things. We're grooming all kinds. And that's not normal. It's not normal for focus to shift inwards and think about her perception and how she's gonna come off in that moment. Now, please, 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 once again, keep in mind what we talked about earlier. The fact that this could simply be that she knows that a lot of people don't believe her. So she's grooming because here it is. It's time to sell this truthful story. It could be that, but I just want you to note that grooming with that question is very strange timing. Then we go to her talking about on that call, the way she was, how she was like making up these lies and she was very calm and she goes, it was very weird. It was very weird. And she flat out admits that it was absolutely weird. Yeah, she gets it. It's weird. And that to me is going right back to the Avis Buckley's strategy of saying, oh yeah, no, I know it's weird. I'm with you. That's weird. It tastes awful. And it works. So I'm going to go on to tell you the truth. But first, I'm going to try to connect with you by telling you, no, I'm with you. It was totally weird. But we're not really getting much of an explanation. I mean, we're going to talk about why she lied and why she, as you know, in life, why she was a compulsive liar. but I'm not getting an explanation here as to, yeah, it was weird. Why was it weird? What was happening? And it's kind of like she brushes it off. We also do see a significant mouth block as that hand comes up. And this is something that as children, when we say something we're not supposed to, we let a secret slip out, we say a bad word, both our hands come up and we block our mouth. As teenagers, we get better at it. And as adults, we get even better at it. We get very subtle. We might do something like this. Hers is a flat out mouth block. I think she's just looking for what to say here, how to justify this, and she doesn't really have much. I think whatever she wants to say isn't good enough. It could be that whatever she's thinking in her head, she's going, no, you can't say that. Don't say that. Oh, and at the end, throughout that entire end, she does a gesture that's not common for her, where she's blocking her neck with her chin. So she's like this. She's looking up at the camera and she's talking like this. And when we're feeling insecure or threatened or vulnerable, we tend to protect the neck. It's a very vulnerable area. So this is as she's talking there. I think something about this question is hitting her wrong. There's something here that she's holding back. She doesn't know what to say. She has no idea how to get out of this one, I think. She's quite uncomfortable. It's almost uncharacteristic how comfortable she is with this specific topic. And again, I would love to ask her more questions about this. Why were you like that? Why weren't you looking for your daughter? I think a good interviewer or interrogator here would push really hard on this point. Okay, now we're going to look at the line. The thing that for me was a really big one in this first episode. Before we do, let me give you the final reason that it's challenging, that it's difficult to figure out going on behavior if this is truthful or dishonest. And it's the fact that we're about to enter, we're about to look at the reasons that she lied. According to her, the reasons she was conditioned to lie about things. And there's a lot of trauma from her past. She's going to talk about a lot of trauma from her childhood. And very often, when you listen to people talk about traumatic things, you're going to see a lot of indicators of stress. And that's essentially what lie detection is. When we're looking for indicators of deception, there is no indicator of deception. There's nothing humans do when they lie. But there are things that we do when we're stressed. Anything from grooming to lip licking to those eye flutters to eye blocking to closing up. All these things are because of stress. So when she's talking about traumatic experiences from her childhood, I can look at things and go, okay, there's a cluster of stress there, but maybe it's because she's thinking about things that are traumatic. I have seen, again, in therapy, tons of people talk about trauma and the body language shifts and looks highly stressful. So that is the final reason this is very challenging. A lot of people are looking at this video going, oh, she's making up the stuff about her childhood. You can't know that. Because if we're seeing stress there, we have to be open to the possibility that it's simply because she's talking about something highly, highly traumatic from her childhood. So it would require a lot of these gestures. So let's keep that in mind. But even without that, there's some real big doozies, starting with this.
How'd you sleep?
There's no such thing as good sleep. Not that I know. A lot of nights I have very clear images and flashbacks, nightmares.
Okay, so that scene just seems like a candid, casual, she's having her coffee and she's asked how'd she sleep, and she goes, there's no such thing as good sleep that I know of. And at first there was a reason I thought that was strange. Then I kept watching and a massive, massive thing hit me as I kept listening to this sequence. And let's talk about both. So the first thing I found weird about that was this. It kind of seems confrontational. It kind of seems weird. Like, someone's casually asking you, how'd you sleep? Typically, you just kind of say, good or fine, thank you. Thanks for asking, how'd you sleep? But there's this almost looking right at the camera and this confrontation, like there's no such thing. There's no such thing as good sleep. And you got to wonder. You got to wonder how this was set up, because why is the camera on, right? If you're asking such a casual question, how'd you sleep? Why is the camera on? I believe that what happened is they were probably, doing their things and someone asked her, how'd you sleep? And she gave that answer. She was like, there's no such thing as good sleep. And someone said, say that again on camera. Let's do that again on camera. Something about this feels a little staged to me, because it doesn't seem like that's just something you would say like that to the camera, unless you're really trying to push a narrative like, I'm miserable, I'm never happy, I don't sleep well. But that's not the main thing. The main thing that bugged me, that really bugged me and that I haven't been able to get past, has to do with what's about to come up next. And it's layered. The more you think about it, the more you go, oh, wait a second, something doesn't quite add up here. So she's asked, how'd you sleep? And she goes, there's no such thing as good sleep for me. I don't know what good sleep is. So I want you to think in your head, why do you think that is? What is the message, the undertone of what she's trying to communicate there? Why doesn't she sleep? The assumption, let me know if you agree in the comments, the assumption is she doesn't sleep well anymore because her daughter has passed. That is presumably the reason any parent who has ever lost a child doesn't sleep well, because their child died. There's no getting over that. So now we're going to go into why she doesn't sleep well. And let's see what it is.
My nightmare last night, it was similar to other things that happened to me growing up.
What was the nightmare last night?
My father was holding me down. That happens again and again and again. When I was 8 years old, my father started to come into my room at night. I was physically hurt, scared because I was physically hurt, and I can't tell mommy what happened. She'll get mad at me. That's what I was told.
The one day just stopped, just before my 12th birthday. My brother started coming in shortly after I turned 12. My brother never raped me, no, absolutely not. But it was close enough where there was a pattern.
So that's very intense, and I'm going to tread softly because that's really, really important to me. I want to start off by talking about the fact that I feel like when she was asked, how'd you sleep? And she said, there's no such thing as good sleep. I feel like the undertone there was because I'm a parent of a child who has passed. But now when we explore that a little more, it's about her. The nightmares aren't about Kaylee. She's not lacking sleep because her daughter died. She's lacking sleep because of her. The nightmares she gets that relate to her. So let's go into those nightmares and then circle back to a very big problem that I have with this. So she starts with some pretty tricky language. She goes that the nightmare was similar to what had happened to her as a child. And then she goes, the nightmare was that my dad, assaulted her again and again and again. That's the dream. She's not necessarily saying that's what happened when she was younger. She's saying that's the dream, which is similar to what happened when she was younger. By the way, that doesn't make it any better. If what she's saying is even slightly true, similar, kind of like, it's still a horrible, horrible thing. And she needs to sue and she needs to take legal action and whatever it is she needs to do. And by the way, important note, this is an analysis of Casey Anthony and her documentary, not George Anthony. Because I'm seeing a lot of people comment how like, oh, she's innocent, he's obviously the guilty one. That's two separate things. We could look at her behavior and go, this is what's suspicious, and we could look at his behavior and go, this is what's suspicious. Those things can coexist in the same world. And again, I'm not arrogant enough to tell you, looking at this is 100% made up, this isn't true. I can point out behaviors, but this is a very sensitive topic and I must tread softly. Because if there's truth to what she's saying, that makes him a horrible person, that needs to be looked into. And yeah, we are seeing certain behaviors consistent with stress. The blink rate is up. We're seeing psychological distancing, where she goes from using the R word to describe the dream to physically hurt when she's talking about the actual memory. But listen, this isn't a point. The point for the documentary is, does she have something to do with the death of her daughter? That's the main question. So for me to try to break this part down, first is really difficult because again, she's talking about something traumatic. So we're gonna see those indicators of stress. It's very normal. It would be weird to not see these things, and I'm not comfortable going there. Because if it's true, it's absolutely horrible. If it's not true, it's horrible that she made it up. But there just isn't enough to go on for me to lean into either one of those sides. What I do notice, however, is this. It cuts while she's talking, it comes back to her, and her nose is red and swollen all of a sudden. And I don't know what happened there. Did they stop, and did someone encourage her, direct her to kind of blow her nose, get a little bit of color going? I don't know. It's not something that a documentary maker would ever do, or at least anyone I've worked with, to be like to direct, especially something like this. Did she need to take a break? because this was getting a little heavy for her. She went and blew her nose, something like that. I don't know. I don't know if it's by design, but you can't really bring color to your nose like that willingly. So something happened. It could be that she's flushing from stress, but it's very specific to the nose. Could be the shifting of color. That as we get stressed, the blood in the face does shift. But to that extent, I don't know. That to me feels like something physical happened to the nose. Then at the end, she talks about her brother, and I am comfortable talking about this, where she's done talking about the dad, she talks about the brother now, and she goes, my brother never arred me. Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. There's that conviction. No, absolutely not. But it was close enough. Well, what does that mean? I mean, did he or did he not? I'm sorry, I know this is a stressful topic, and I'm sorry to be digging here, but what does that mean? Like, he absolutely didn't do that, but it was close enough. Well, to me, getting close enough to that is kind of doing that. So is it that? Is it not that? Is it absolutely not, or is it close enough? Those things can't really coexist to me when it comes to this thing. But okay, let's talk about the big one, the elephant in the room, the thing that hit me across the face with this whole thing. So while she's having her coffee, she goes, I don't sleep well anymore. And again, please let me know in the comments if you felt that was because she's the parent of a child who has passed. Is that what we all thought? Because I definitely did. Now she goes on to talk about why she doesn't sleep well. And it's because of her childhood memories. Things that happened to her in her childhood that have traumatized her. And this is the reason she lies. This is the reason she doesn't sleep well. Everything in her personality is being blamed on these childhood events. But let's go back to the beginning of the video, to that scene in the beginning where she was showing us pictures of her and Kaylee and presenting this narrative of how she was so happy. They were so happy. Time of our lives. They spent all this time together and it was happy and innocent. We were being told this narrative of when Kaylee was around, everything was great. Everything was happy. Everything was innocent.
Those moments were happy, innocent. There was no trauma. There was no darkness.
She even goes on to say that Kaylee was the only thing that truly and honestly mattered to her, nothing else. But if the reason you don't sleep well predates Kaylee by decades, if the reason you lie about everything goes back to your childhood and it was so traumatic that it ruined your personality, it allows you to not sleep, then it's not consistent with what you said. When Kaylee was alive, you weren't happy. It wasn't innocent. It's either things happened in your childhood that traumatized you, that ruined your life, or you were happy with Kaylee and everything was great and it was innocent and you guys colored together and it's giggles and remembering that, but these two things cannot coexist. You're saying here that the reason you don't sleep well predates Kaylee's birth. It has nothing to do with her. She's not the reason you don't sleep well. So if that's the case, then how is it possible that you're trying to present this narrative that when she was around, everything was happy and butterflies and she's the only thing that truly and honestly mattered? There are two narratives here that are being presented that cannot coexist.
And again, this is after going through therapy and trying to explain why I got the tattoo in the first place, especially during that time period, because that was a subconscious way for me to speak out against all of it.
Against what?
My family, my flawed and f***ed up family.
Okay, so here she's talking about the tattoo that she got. So in those 31 days on July 2nd, so as far as she's concerned, it's been 2 weeks now that her daughter is missing. And she gets a tattoo that says La Bella Vita, the good life, while her daughter is missing. And this is another one that for a lot of people was a big question mark. And she's talking about it here. Let's look at some of the body language. She says, speak out against all of it. We see a mix of anger and disgust. Those two could come very close to one another. With anger, we see the eyebrows come down and there's tension in the teeth. Sometimes the teeth are bared, sometimes closed mouth, but still we get that tension. With disgust, you're gonna see that scrunching a little more with the lines on the side like this, but that can also happen when we bare the teeth. So it's hard to distinguish in this case if that's she's feeling disgust or anger towards speak out against all of it. But doesn't matter. It's a negative feeling there. She's either disgusted by it or angered by it. But let's look at what she's saying here. So she gets the tattoo La Bella Vita to speak out against her flawed family. So here's the thing with Casey Anthony. She has presented two very different narratives, and we're going to explore this more in the upcoming videos. But during the trial, the main defense was that Kaylee drowned by accident. That was her story then. And during this documentary, the main story she's presenting is that her father had Kaylee the whole time. Her father had Kaylee and told Casey not to say anything. So those are the two scenarios, and that's a big problem. The fact that at trial there was a different defense that was presented than in his documentary is a massive problem. And we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail in the upcoming videos, part 2 and part 3. But let's consider both, right? Let's consider both. Your daughter has drowned 2 weeks ago. You haven't told anyone. Is that an appropriate time to get a tattoo that says the good life, La Bella Vita? Absolutely not. No. Let's look at the other scenario. Your dad has your daughter. He has her, he's kidnapped her, he's holding her over your head. Oh, and by the way, this is the same dad that you just said when you were little did some horrible things, unspeakable things. Okay, so in that scenario, is it a good time to go get a tattoo that says the good life? Absolutely not. So in either defense, whether your daughter drowned or whether your father, your awful father, according to you, who does horrible things to young girls, has her, in neither case is it an appropriate time to go get a tattoo that says La Bella Vita. So it's kind of like you're giving it an excuse, like, no, it wasn't about that. It was about, speaking up against my flawed family. But it's not the time. For 2 weeks, your daughter is in a horrible situation. She's either dead or in the hands of a monster. Is it really time to get a tattoo that says La Bella Vita? So I still did not get the answer I'm looking for here. Yes, you're making some sort of excuse. It's not about that. It's about this. But the timing is still horribly off.
I remember these pictures like they were yesterday. And that's part of the reason why it's so hard to look back. I miss her every second of every day.
Okay, so there have been a lot of people online who have compared Casey Anthony to Amber Heard in terms of behavior and also how sometimes they tend to over-dramatize certain things. Let me say this. If Casey Anthony was acting that little bit that we just saw right there, she is a far better actress than Amber Heard. Because to me, emotionally, if we look at just strictly, scene by scene, that was significantly more convincing to me than any of the sad testimony moments that Amber Heard had. Just strictly behavior speaking. I'm not saying who's sadder, who's less sad, who's being fake, who's being real. Just from a behavioral standpoint, we're seeing the flushing there in the face. And again, it's not easy to get that color to the face like that. So we're seeing that. The tip of the nose is red again, but there's more red all over the face. The eyebrows are also dead on. It's not easy to fake. We've got the inner corners coming in like this and upwards, and we have the line in the middle. We have that wiggly line at the top with that little bit of a downward curve. We're seeing what we're supposed to. There are times where she does a bit of that eyebrows of sadness where we don't quite see all that activity, but here we are. We're seeing the tears, and she's falling apart in her speech. It's very consistent with the correct facial expression for sadness and grief. Speaking of grief, we're seeing in the chin that tension, that bossing of the chin, which is again consistent with sadness and grief. We're seeing her focus on whatever she's looking at. She's looking at Kaylee. For once almost, dare I say, her focus is on Kaylee. It's not on the camera. It's not on her self-perception. It's outwards. See, we're not seeing grooming. She knows she looks like a mess on camera, but we're not seeing grooming. I mean, with the Kleenex, she's wiping tears and things like that, but we're not seeing this kind of adjustment because this isn't her, in this moment, necessarily trying to sell a story. She's just living this emotion in this moment. And this brings me to a very, very, very important point, and that's the following. Very often when we look at things like this, we tend to be super polarized. We see it as A or B, and that's it. No gray area, and I hate that. I hate how in today's culture, the gray area seems to be inexistent, whereas in reality, most things exist in a gray area. So for example, most people look at this and only see one of two options. Either option A, Casey Anthony is telling the truth, she's a saint of a woman, she did not kill her daughter, or Casey Anthony is a monstrous being who killed her daughter in cold blood, she doesn't care, never has cared, she's a complete monster. People think it's either this or this. Truth of the matter is, there's a third option, and it's probably the right one, what's actually happening, which is somewhere in the middle of those two. Anywhere between she accidentally caused it to she purposely did this. It could be somewhere there, and at the same time, she regrets what she did and she misses her daughter. Unless she's a complete monster, void of all emotion, who did this horrible thing because she wanted to get rid of her daughter, and up until today hasn't missed a single thing about her daughter. Unless that's true, it's possible that somewhere in her there would be remorse or sadness or missing her daughter, even if she had something to do with this. Have I seen people in interrogation rooms that are cold-blooded, void of all emotion, who kill people with zero remorse? Yes, but it's excessively rare. This is her daughter we're talking about. So again, let's consider the option that there's very much a possibility where she is lying, she is making it up, she had something to do with this, but also misses her daughter, also misses parts of her daughter, also has regrets. It's very possible. So basically here with part one, we're getting the foundation. We're getting the background, we're getting her trying to justify why she behaved in certain ways, laying down the groundwork, and now we're gonna go more into the details of what happened, the play-by-play in parts 2 and 3. So for me overall, she has a lot to explain that for me, I didn't get an explanation that I'm happy with. There's a lot of behaviors that are inconsistent. Her focus on self is bothering me. The fact that we're getting two narratives, one where she was happy and innocent and everything was good and she's giggling as she thinks back, contrasted with the fact that she's had a miserable life. She's had early childhood trauma that was supposed to be there through that entire timeline, doesn't match up. So there's a lot of things that don't add up for me. There are a lot of things that don't add up. But it's a far cry from seeing behaviors that don't add up and going, she for sure did this. But I think there was some really interesting stuff that we talked about today. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and we're gonna come back with parts 2 and 3, and I'm gonna keep it really, really interesting. And I'm gonna bring in someone who's really gonna help us out to try to figure out what's going on here. So until then, let me know in the comments what you thought. Hey, happy holidays. Whatever you celebrate, I hope it's amazing. I hope you have an amazing new year. And I will see you with some new content, parts 2 and 3 coming up. Let me know in the comments what you thought. I will see you on the next one.
For the first time since she was acquitted for the murder of her daughter, Casey Anthony speaks up in a documentary titled Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. But what does her body language, word choice, and overall behavior reveal? Are these the words of a mother looking for answers? Is there more to this story? And why does this internet search suggest a disturbing realization? Hey everyone, welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and TV shows all over the world. In this video, we are diving into part 3 of the documentary Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, and there is a lot going on in part 3. We get more details about her childhood. We get more details about what happened to Kaylee, which is a very different story than was presented by her legal team in court, and we're going to look at all that. And we also get a lot of stuff with her behavior and facial expressions, a lot of exciting stuff. Now, due to popular demand, I couldn't do this analysis alone. Last week, I had a guest on the channel, and the feedback from you was incredible. And I personally also believe that he brought a lot to this analysis from a very different but enormously valid perspective. And so I decided to have him back for part 3, but we're doing this in a different way. Because there was so much material in this one episode to look at, I split it into 2 kind of categories. The stuff that's interesting to look at from a behavioral standpoint, and then the stuff that's interesting to look at from a psychiatric standpoint, which is my guest's specialty. And as such, we put the first part right here on this channel. It's the video you're watching, and you're gonna hear a lot from me in this part with great input from him, but we're gonna focus on a lot of the behaviors in this episode. And then we put the other part, which dives a lot more into her psychological state and what's going on in her head and how likely these things are that she's saying on his channel. So when you're done watching this video, head over to his channel. I don't know if his video is up yet, but it will be very soon. So if it's not, just check in again. But we're splitting this into two parts. You're watching one part here and the other part is on his channel. So once again, my very exciting guest this week is a forensic psychiatrist based in London, and it's his job to go into courtrooms, prisons, and locked psychiatric units and assess mentally disordered offenders. He's also an expert witness in a lot of criminal trials. So this is literally his job, to look at the behaviors of individuals and try to assess if he believes there's something going on with their psychology. So back by popular demand, welcome back to the channel. Once again, Dr. Shahom Daz. What's going on, man?
Hello, Mr. Spidey. Thank you so much for having me back on. I'm excited about putting this case to rest and just getting through the final bits of this very, very bizarre woman.
Yes, sir. I'm excited as well. But don't thank me for being back here, because it's like a community here at the Behavioral Arts and the Tribe has spoken. I don't think they would have allowed me to do this without you. So I don't have much of a say here, but I'm really excited. Let's dive right in, starting with this.
He's telling me that I was coming home soon, it would all be over soon. I just had to keep following his instructions. He told me what he thought I wanted to hear, that he was supporting me, that I was coming home, that everything would be okay.
Had a couple extra little prayers and just said, you're coming home soon, sweetheart. Kaylee's going to be home soon, so we can be that family again.
So Doc, right off the bat here, I wanted to ask you, because this is one of the rare times we're seeing the interaction between just the two of them, George and Casey. And there might be nothing here, but I was curious to get your thoughts on this. Are we seeing here between the two of them the relationship that she's described? One of fear and complicity, and maybe we're not seeing it here, maybe we are. I would love to get your thoughts as to what you're seeing here.
Sure. So, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that she's in fear of her father at this moment in time. She's painted this narrative of control and dominance. Doesn't look like that to me at all. It looks like absolute relief and maybe a flood of emotions, maybe even some comfort in his words. And I know from other footage that I've seen that she's been the opposite of that. She's been quite callous and cold in her interactions in prison with her parents. So it feels like this emotion has just built up and built up and built up for whatever reason, whether she knows something that everybody else doesn't know or not. And it's just this floodgate of emotions that are coming out. But it doesn't feel like she's sort of petrified of his next move. So that's what I think in terms of their interactions. What about you? What do you think about the body language?
Yeah, so with the body language, we're getting something really interesting from her. And I would agree with one word you used, which is comfort. The moment he says, we're going to get Kaylee home, Kaylee's coming home, we see a smile of comfort. We see her, she's looking down, she's feeling vulnerable, and we see that smile of comfort, but then there's a shift. That smile goes away as her hand comes up like this to block her eyes, and there's that hard squint. And this is a cluster that is very consistent with an unpleasant thought in one's head. So whenever we see the eyes close like this hard, typically speaking, one of two things is happening. One is either focus, really, like we're really trying to get an image in our head, or two, there's an image that we're having a hard time dealing with, especially with that hand coming up like this to block. Sometimes we see it like this, very consistent with that. What's interesting about that is we see this gesture even in children that were born blind, which tells us a lot because they don't really have a need to do that. So it is kind of built into our subconscious. So I think at that point, personally, she's getting that comfort, like, oh, Kaylee's gonna come home, his words are comforting, but then she remembers something that makes her go, oh, I don't think that's gonna happen. It's one of the rare moments where I see something in her body language that makes me go, there's more here, there's more in this moment that's going on in her head.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. And I suppose the other thing that strikes me is that the father is clearly saying that he's praying for Kaylee to return. So what does that mean? Is there a shared lie? If we're to believe Casey, then she's saying that they're both kind of involved in a shared lie between them because they both know that's not the case.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so glad you brought this up because That's what I was wondering. So according to her, he has Kaylee. And now he's saying, I'm praying for Kaylee to come home. And there isn't even an ounce of her going, Dad, I thought you had her. Because maybe it's being recorded. So maybe they're in this shared little theater they're putting on. But there isn't even a little bit of her going, wait, what do you mean? Dad, I thought you have her. There's none of that.
Yeah. To me, it seems that what he's saying feels more genuine. I can't, say with 100% certainty that it is, but it just seems more genuine than the belief that they're both within this kind of shared lie.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no part of her that seems confused by the fact that he doesn't seem to know where Kaylee is. I don't feel that there's some narrative they're masking together.
At 2:51 that afternoon, someone searches for the term foolproof suffocation. That computer was started up at 2:49 that afternoon.
Do you remember the internet searches? At 2:49, whilst Casey's cell phone is pinging a tower nearest the home, the Anthony's family desktop computer is activated by someone using Casey's password-protected account. At 2:51, someone does a search for foolproof suffocation.
Wasn't me. I can tell you that. Everyone had each other's passwords because it was the family computer.
Do you think it's possible your dad did that 2:51 p.m. search if he was at work at 3?
Where he worked and where our house was located was less than 10 minutes. There was enough time for him to have been home, still made those searches, and then left for work.
So a couple of things occurred to me after I look at that clip. Firstly, the thing about the passwords, anything's possible. I'm not saying she's 100% lying, but it just seems unusual to me. Why, if you have a family computer that everybody has access to and everyone's sharing, why even bother putting a password on it in the first place? That seems very odd to me. Surely it's just simpler to not have a password than create one and share it. It defeats the purpose of having a password in the first place. I suppose the other thing is that her suggestion that her father, George, just about managed to quickly do this Google search and then bolt. I don't know. I've never looked up how to suffocate somebody on Google, but if I did, I imagine I'd be quite invested in it. It's not like a random errand that I would suddenly do. I wouldn't fit it in between my shopping list and all my other chores. I'd probably spend a lot of time and effort thinking about it, unless it was a panicky last minute search. But if you're looking for the correct way to suffocate somebody without detection, then that's pre-planned, right? It's not like Googling how to hide a body or something. So it just doesn't add up to me. I don't see a scenario where somebody, especially an ex-cop, is, very clumsily Googling something in between doing all these other things. That's what I think. What about you?
Completely agreed, especially because with your first part, she's been very clear about the fact that she was hiding a lot from her family at this point, where she was working, where her daughter, who was taking care of her daughter, she had a lot of secrets that she was hiding. She was secretly planning to move away, according to her testimony. So yeah, she's not going to have a password that everyone else knows when she's hiding that much. That was my instinct. The second thing that jumped out at me here is, like you said, we're talking about an ex-cop here. I don't think an ex-cop is Googling suffocation on a computer knowing that this is the kind of thing that they can easily find, history search. So I suppose for me, at the end of the day, there's two narratives. One is what we call Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a philosophical standpoint that the simplest solution to something is usually the right one. So if we apply that here, and if we look at, it's not just the search, by the way. If we look at that document, it says that shortly after, the person went on MySpace, which is a website she used and he didn't. So the simplest answer is she was using that computer to search.
And hang on, if she's saying that he went back to work almost immediately afterwards, then he surely wouldn't have enough time to figure out how to kill somebody and then go on MySpace, would he?
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Occam's razor tells us it was probably her making the searches. But if we apply the CSI Miami, secret plot twist, I suppose there's a slight possibility where he did something awful and then he decided to frame her. So he went on the computer and used her password to search this thing. And then it's unlikely. It's an exciting narrative, but I feel, I don't know how you feel, I feel it's unlikely.
If he was trying to frame her, then I think he would make more of an effort than just one random internet search. And he would have nudged the investigators towards that search, knowing that it's there. It just seems a bit of a tepid attempt to try and frame somebody to do that one search that one time and then nothing else.
Great point. As a reminder, the prosecutor, there was an oversight. They didn't bring this up in court. And if he had this big plot to frame her, he'd make sure it came up somehow. So that's a really solid point. In terms of her body language, again, there's a lot of challenges here because with this documentary, I'm assuming that she knew what questions were coming up next and that had time to retake certain things. But right in the beginning, we see a very clear freeze. Like she's pacifying a little or using those adapters, pacifiers, adapters, same thing where she's kind of rubbing the hands like this. This is a adjust for stress, self-soothing. But then she freezes up as that question's coming in. And usually when we freeze up, it is consistent with an increased cognitive load where we're thinking the brain's working overtime, so we freeze to not draw attention to ourselves. We see a freeze there. So I do think there's a lot going on in her head in anticipation of how she's going to answer this question.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that there's a possibility of what she's saying isn't the truth because it takes more effort to lie? Is that?
It could be. I would need to see a heck of a lot more to say, I think this is fabrication, because it can also be her really just trying to remember what's going on with these searches and things like that. Which actually brings me to another point. So Dr. Daz, I want you to do this, as well as all the viewers. Put yourself in Casey's position. So you're seeing that there was a search on the family computer that says foolproof suffocation. And you didn't do that search. Wouldn't you think that this is the most incriminating thing for your dad? Like she's been saying in part 2, I don't want to accuse him of murder, but there's this search that you didn't do. Wouldn't you be like, look dead into that camera and go, guys, I didn't make this search, but someone in my house did. This isn't an accident. Wouldn't you be begging the viewers to be like, guys, wake up? She's on the defense here. She's very defensive with this. She's like, well, he could have done this. He could have done that. It wasn't me. Whereas if it was me and someone told me that there was a search done on my computer for foolproof suffocation, I know I didn't do that, I would be a bloodhound. Does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense, yeah.
Let me know in the comments, everyone, would that not be like, if you didn't make that search, would you not just go after him like a savage when you were told that this search was done on the computer? It kind of feels off to me that she's really defensive about this as opposed to going straight offense.
It's almost like a slightly awkward, uncomfortable point that she can't avoid rather than, as you said, this should be proof, this is the focus, yeah. I agree. See your point, yeah.
So that's the situation we have with George. Why did he want his daughter to die? For an accident. So the real question is, if you were telling people behind the scenes it was an accident, would you testify as a star witness in a trial that would get your child death for that accident?
I have never heard that before. And that's shocking. Why, if you did think it was an accident, would you want the death penalty? That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so Dr. Daz, this clip actually, I was really excited to talk to you about because our fields are separate, but there are certain things that connect what we do. And one of those things is very much avoiding leading questions. Because in my line of work, interview, interrogation, a leading question can open up a really bad can of worms and a slippery slope. And in your line of work, you could talk to us a little bit about this, but if you ask leading questions, you can put ideas in the mind of the person you're assessing, I would imagine. And here we're getting something that I don't know if it irritated you the way it irritated me, but let's talk about leading questions, Dr. Daz.
Sure, absolutely. So as you say, in my psychiatric assessments, I'm trained not to use them because you don't get a fair picture or narrative of what the patient in front of you actually thinks. However, as when I'm cross-examined by barristers in criminal trials, they often do use leading questions. So that's exactly like the kind of tactics that they do to try and discredit some of the evidence if it doesn't suit their particular side. In terms of this actual footage, yeah, I completely agree. So the interviewer is implying that George is intentionally being the star witness because he wants Casey to fail. He wants her to be found guilty. He wants the death penalty.
To die.
The death penalty. But surely what he wants is for the truth to be found, for justice for Kaylee. And he doesn't know definitively at that point whether Casey's responsible or not. Like, he suspects it, but he doesn't know that for a fact. And he suspects it for good reason. It's not just there was an accident, she ended up in prison on remand. There was an accident, she misled the police. She seemingly didn't tell anybody. It's different from her narrative, but objectively, she didn't tell anybody or let anybody know, including George, for a number of days, for almost an entire month. So it's more than just what the interviewer is implying. And finally, I'd say that I think it's a bit of a stretch or a bit presumptive to say that George wants the death penalty. He doesn't get to choose. He just gives evidence, as is his role as a witness in the case. And he'll know that as a police officer. But he doesn't choose anything to do with the punishment. What do you think, Spidey?
Completely agreed. And I think one of the things you touched on is we're talking about an ex-cop, someone who devoted his life to law enforcement. He's being subpoenaed by the state to come in and answer some questions. I think it's a false equivalence to say he wants her to die. That's not, he's there to answer questions. That's the way I look at that. Again, not defending George Anthony and washing his hands of all involvement, but I think it's a false equivalence. And you're making a documentary here. I think leading questions should be avoided. That's my thought. I want to talk about really quickly the second gentleman, the one with the short hair, who lived with her. And we've seen numerous times throughout this documentary. I'm going to give you guys a little peek behind the curtain of mentalism, what I do professionally. So mentalists are entertainers who use trickery, psychology, nonverbal communication to make it seem like we can read your thoughts. And Dr. Dawes, I know you're a fan of mentalism. You've seen a couple of shows out in England. There's some amazing mentalists. And something mentalists do quite often is cold reading. And cold reading is a process where we use observations, deductive reasoning, nonverbal communication. This is where I apply a lot of what I've learned in body language and nonverbal communication and behavior analysis. So we look at someone and we understand certain things about the way they function and we say it to them. I'm getting the sense that blah, 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 blah. Now, mentalists use it for entertainment only, strictly. It's very important. There's people out there who use it to convince you that they can read your thoughts or they can communicate with certain things. I don't like that. I use it strictly for entertainment. But I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek as to one of the things that I do when I do my mentalism. I look for specific things, certain binaries in people, and for what I see, I have a script. And one of the binaries that I look for is something I call Occam's razor versus conspiracy theorist. So there are people out there in the world who apply Occam's razor, which is basically, once again, the simplest answer to something is probably the right one. So they look for facts, data, and just follow what is most likely. Then you have the opposite of that, conspiracy theorists, who, with very little evidence, they like to follow the exciting narrative. They like that there's something else to uncover here that gets them excited. And in today's world of social media, this is very present. And I can spot that difference very quickly. For example, Dr. Dawes, it's painfully obvious to me within the first few minutes that we met that you apply Occam's razor. You follow the logic and what seems to be most likely, that's what you go with. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
In fact, for the medical legal work, we have to analyze everything on the balance of probability. So it's literally been drummed into me since I was a junior doctor. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I'm using a lot of that. I'm using your profession. I'm using the way you speak. I'm using a lot of different things to know that. When we look at that second guy, the one with the short hair, black shirt, he is the definition of someone who is prone to believe in conspiracy theories. Even look at the way he took that information. Well, what do you make of George Anthony, testifying for the death penalty? He's like, oh my God. Like he's all excited. He's all, there's something to uncover here. And his mind just goes nuts on him. He does this numerous times. Okay, now we're gonna dive deeper into her narrative and get some details that when we back up and look at the whole picture, just do not make any sense. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that like button. It really does help with the success of these videos. Hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
I remember my father said something during the course of my case. I don't remember if it was in an interview, but he said he used to love the sweet smell of Kaylee's sweat.
Casey, he said that at Kaylee's funeral.
Was it really? Of course he did. What better way to memorialize your granddaughter than to tell the world that you were abusing her too? I'm gonna need a minute. I need a minute, sorry. I didn't remember that it was that. I wasn't there, I was in jail. I just remember being told that it was said.
So that was pretty emotional. And I know there's a lot of people out there saying she's acting and she's putting it on. And yes, there's a lot of evidence in a lot of these clips where there's a lot of embellishing and a lot of overacting. But in this moment, it certainly seems like something really emotional is hitting her. And I go back to the fact that the gray area exists a lot of the time. Not everything has to be on an extreme. It's possible that she's hiding something, that there's more to this narrative than she's telling us, but there's also real emotion here, that a part of her actually misses her daughter. But there's two things I want to talk about here. The first one is there's a leap there, a leap in logic that we'll come back to. But the second thing is a question that I want to ask you, Dr. Daz.
Sure.
Is this kind of thing normal? So she's remembering something that obviously is impacting her, something that is convincing her that her father has admitted to abusing Kaylee. Would it be normal for her to not remember where she heard that or where that information is coming from? So there's a debate in my head. Half of me is going, I don't know, if it's that important and you think it's that incriminating, you would remember exactly when he said it. But another part of me is going, it was such a mess, so much going on at the time, so maybe it's possible. So is it normal that something of this much importance to her, she can't remember the details of where she would have heard that?
Sure, good question. So I think in a sort of typical, everyday, normal circumstances, it would be very unusual and almost not explainable that she wouldn't remember where she heard her father say that. But I think in this particular case, I think it's understandable because we have to remember that this whole period was absolute chaos and turmoil. I'm sure she had multiple conversations with detectives interrogating her defense team, her actual parents when they came to visit her in prison when she was on remand. She probably saw clips of interviews of herself on TV. So I imagine in this kind of minefield of trauma and emotion at the time, I think it is feasible that she might have forgotten exactly where she heard that one comment because so much was going on. That's what I think.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Thank you for that. That does really clarify it for me because I was very confused as to whether or not that was possible. But Dr. Daz, let's talk about this leap that we both noticed. I'm not saying that statement makes you go, oh, how sweet. The fact that he misses the smell of her sweat. I'm not saying it's the sweetest thing I've ever heard. I can see how somebody would look at that and go, it's a little weird. It's not something I would say. But I also don't think, and you can touch on this, that it's the most incriminating thing in the world. And by the way, we're going to look at that clip. We're going to, on your channel, we're analyzing different scenes and we're looking at his speech. And we're hearing him say that. And in context, in the way he says it, I think it's even less noteworthy. But she seems to really be impacted by that. So why don't you tell us about this? Is it because her mind is looking for that because she sees him in this frame? Do you also feel like it's a massive gap? Do you think it's merited? Talk to us.
Sure. So, I mean, I think we touched on this, didn't we, during the last recording of the video for the last part that we recorded, which is that we know that Casey has told many lies, many untruths to a number of people at a number of points, including lying to the police. We should be very careful to not assume that she's not a victim of abuse or that she's lying about that, right? Frankly, I certainly don't know whether that's true or not. If it is true, then I can understand why she would be petrified that her father might be abusive towards Kaylee and she might worry that he abused her. I can understand that. But I'd have to say respectfully, that statement doesn't indicate abuse in my view, like missing the sweet smell of Kaylee's sweat. It's a slightly odd thing to say, but I mean, it's not a sexual statement in my view. That's not an indication of abuse at all. And secondly, why would he even say that? It wouldn't make sense. If he really is guilty of everything that Casey says, then, you know, he'd be keeping his mouth shut. He wouldn't be like dropping little subtle breadcrumbs of indicating that he abused her. So yeah, I don't really understand where Casey's coming from.
If you put abuse goggles on me, so you have me look at someone and you tell me this person's an abuser and he makes that statement, I might go, oh yeah, weird. But if you don't put those goggles on me, if you put the goggles of like sweet grieving grandfather, then I'd look at it and go, he misses his granddaughter. Yeah. But we also have to consider that he would also have those goggles. He knows that this is being filmed, it's being broadcast, and if in his head, he knows that that's his role, that he's done horrible things. He would be very careful with the words that could be used against him. I think, especially once again, as an ex-cop. So once again, I'll say this again and again, I'm not saying he's a sweet little saint, but to me, there's a bit of a leap there between what he said and going, I can't believe he would just admit that he did this based on that statement. I don't see it as an admission of guilt.
Yeah, I completely agree. Neither do I.
She was never left alone with my dad, not even when she was an infant. Because I know what I lived through. As a kid who was abused, that was my fear.
That she wouldn't be safe.
That she wouldn't be safe.
Okay, so again, I'm totally with you that just because we know she's lied about a ton of other stuff doesn't mean we need to assume that she's lying about abuse. Typically, that's something you want to take very seriously and treat separately. And in that effort, in the last video, part 2, we looked at a lot of her testimony pertaining to him being an abusive father. And you said there were a lot of fluctuations in when she remembered this. But there was a letter that she wrote in jail, and she even said that most of these memories came back to her while she was in jail. That they weren't really, like they were there, but not really accessible to her before jail. And there's a letter in jail that she wrote that clearly says that she had some dreams, and based on those dreams, she thinks that her father did certain things. Now we have something different, don't we? Because here she's saying that she never let Kaylee around her father when she was an infant because he was abusive. So now, way before jail, way before Kaylee went missing, you're behaving in ways to protect your daughter from him with the knowledge that he's abusive. But that's not what was reflected in part 2 when she talked about how she didn't remember these things until she was in jail. So once again, Dr. Oz, I don't know if you agree, but for me, there's this, throughout this whole thing, there's an inconsistency of when she remembers his behaviors. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a word that we used several times during the last episode that we recorded. I don't think we've used it that often yet, but I think we're about to. So inconsistency is the key word for me. So inconsistencies you've just highlighted. So there's a big difference between these fragmented, vague, uncertain memories of potential abuse that were kind of rekindled when she was in prison versus obviously clear kind of memories if she's so scared about the safety of Kaylee that she's literally keeping her away from her father, or at least not leaving them unaccompanied. Number one. Even more to me, the other inconsistency that stood out even more was the very fact that her behavior when whatever happened to Kaylee happened is completely inconsistent with that. So she let her father walk away at one point, unsure of whether Kaylee was safe, whether she was alive, without chasing him. She just let him walk away, apparently in fear. If she's been protective of Kaylee for several years of her life, why would she let that happen? And why would she kind of act in, or seemingly, on the surface at least, act indifferently, nonchalantly, going off and partying for 31 days, if she was that fearful for Kaylee's safety for that whole period of time? Again, it's just inconsistent. So something doesn't add up. She's not telling the truth one way or the other.
100% agreed. And I'm so glad you brought it back to that because, yes, first of all, we're getting this fluctuation of when she remembered his behaviors. Then we have the inconsistency of her saying that she would never leave him alone, but then for a month she did. And then there's something else I want to bring up while we're talking about the letter she wrote in jail and we're talking about him having her and her keeping her from him. I gave a lot of thought last week after our video to several elements that we talked about. That letter was one of them. You know how significant that letter was for me and how excited I was about analyzing that letter. And I realized something else. And this is the first time I'm presenting this to you, Dr. Daz, is the fact that she was confiding to that friend of hers in jail, right? Saying things for the first time, like saying to her things about like abuse. I think I was abused. I'm having these memories unlocked. She was really confiding in her. But not once in that letter did she mention, I'm terrified because my father has my daughter. Like, you're confiding in this woman in jail. You're telling her things you haven't told anyone else. You're even saying, I feel comfortable sharing things with you. But in the confidence of that letter, she never once mentioned that she's scared. Because in that moment, according to her narrative, she thought that her dad had Kaylee. it's not mentioned once in that letter while she's confiding to her friend. I find that rather suspicious. That while she's opening up to his friend, she'll say, by the way, I haven't told anyone this, but he's got her and I'm terrified.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Spidey. Do you think that she knew that that letter would potentially become evidence and become exposed and become public? Do you think she knew that?
It's a terrific question. But all the more reason, like if she thought, so neither one would justify why it's not in there for me, because if she thought, bear with me, if she thought it wasn't going to be evidence, she would confide in her friend. If she thought it was going to be evidence, they presented this narrative in court that he had her. So she would have maybe slipped it in there as a preemptive way to kind of get people to believe that that narrative was true. So there, in neither scenario would I understand why she wouldn't mention in the letter.
Yeah. So what scenario doesn't make sense? I suppose there is that
it didn't happen.
It's not true, and that she kind of retrospectively invented it. Yeah.
So that's what you know what? Let me say that flat out. My viewers know that I'm very, very serious about not being polarized. That I like to stay in the objective middle, in the gray area, and allow my viewers to take these observations and form their own opinion. But of all the things with Casey Anthony, there's one thing I refuse to believe. And that is the fact that she thought during those 31 days that Kaylee was safe with George. I don't know the truth of what happened, the details of how much she knows, how much she's hiding. I can never know that based on behavior. But I absolutely do not personally believe that for their 31 days, she thought Kaylee was with George. I don't believe that to be true.
You felt that your dad had basically kidnapped her.
And was keeping her from me, yes.
Even though you felt that body in your arms and you knew that something was terribly wrong.
Told me she was going to be okay. It's what I chose to accept. There's that little girl inside of me that wanted to believe he wouldn't hurt her the way he hurt me.
And you didn't think that there was any way she could have drowned and he found her in the pool?
No, she had no way of getting in the pool. There was nothing for her to have shimmied up. To me, there's no way of explaining that. Unless he put her in the... Unless he put her in the pool to cover up what he did.
So quite a lot going on there that I want to talk about. Some good stuff with body language. When she's asked, even as you felt that body in your arms, because she testified in part 2 that when she got outside, he gave her the body and she held it and it felt cold and heavy and wet, and then he took her back and left. So now she's being asked, you thought she was safe this whole time, even if you felt that. And the moment that body is brought up, we see a very distinct cluster of behaviors. We see a lip compression as her lips thin out, like this. We see a slow blink at the same time. Her blink slows down. And she starts nodding and cuts off the interviewer.
Her arms, and you knew that something was terribly wrong.
Told me she was going to be okay.
As if she's in a rush to address that. So that cluster for me, what it indicates, first of all, lip compression again is withheld opinion or disagreement. So when we're holding something back or we disagree, you might see that lip compression. Slow blink, going back to what I said earlier, eye blocking, any eye blocking gesture is an unpleasant thought, something that we're internalizing our thoughts, and often we really are having a hard time visualizing it or don't want to. And then she cuts her off. Here's what I think is happening in that moment. I think she regrets ever having said that she held the body. I think afterwards she thought about it and said, no, I just should have said I came out, I saw him with Kaylee, he walked in, that's it. I think she knows that having had that body in her hands makes it more unlikely that she thought Kaylee was safe. So I think in this moment when that's brought up, that slow blink and lip compression is like, I really shouldn't have said that. Almost like without opinion or disagreement with herself. And eye blocking like, yeah, do you see what I'm saying? Like that cluster, like someone says something and you go, like you're having a hard time dealing with it.
And also, did I get this right, Spidey? Did she say that after she held the body, she still didn't know whether Kaylee was alive or dead or safe or not?
Exactly.
And that's, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's just not feasible, is it? It's your own child who you think might have died, literally put in your arms. Like,
why did you give her back? Exactly, why did you not try to, hey, Kaylee, are you okay? So that's exactly it. So I think she's going, not my proudest moment. Do you see how that's consistent with that? Look, if I go like, not my best moment. You know what I mean? So that's what we're getting there. And that's why I think she nods and immediately addresses it. She cuts off the interview, be like, no, yeah, I did. Let's move on. So she's in a rush to get past this because she knows it's not her best moment. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Dr. Dawes, I'm going to ask you this. Given how there are certain moments where we're seeing real emotion, real grief, given how she's presenting these things that are very contradictory, and she's presenting it in a way where she doesn't see how conflicting they are, is it possible that in time, to deal with this, to deal with her own demons, she's convinced herself of certain things that aren't true? And I mean in fact. She believes in fact things that don't represent reality. Is it possible?
Sure. Not really. No, not in fact. And I'm glad you made that distinction, but absolutely in emotion. So firstly, you do get mental illnesses where you have actual delusions. So those are fixed beliefs in something that are not true. They tend to be very bizarre, typically, or paranoid or grandiose, not, factual matters about whether somebody drowned a child or not. But I don't think we're seeing that at all, because you get other sort of signs of mental illness here. In terms of my clinical experience, having assessed lots of defendants during criminal trials, I've had many people lie to me, and I found out retrospectively that they're lying. And the one thing that I would say is that often they can be very much invested in the emotion that they've come to cultivate over a period of time. So I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think that she would believe fully in the facts if she's lying about what happened, but she can convince herself of the emotional feeling. She can still invest and feel the emotion. She can feel wrong, she can feel victimized, she can feel outraged, even though it's not factually biased, and that can increase over time with practice.
The ladder wasn't on the pool, so
So none of that really, it didn't.
None of it makes sense.
Didn't make total sense,
Well, my thought was that he was using that as a way to cover up.
Yeah.
Even then, what he had done.
Whatever this accident was that he had done to Kaylee, George was involved, and I don't think the accident was in the pool.
He'd put a pillow over my face and he'd smother me to knock me out. That happens.
Really?
That happens several times.
That could be the accident.
Possible.
To stop noises, to grab a pillow, and that would be the accident.
Okay, so I kind of want to end where we ended last week with this clip. But before we get to that, I want to say this. The gentleman she's talking to, who she's become quite close to and works with now, who hired her and sheltered her after the trial, is the investigator who was part of her legal team. It was his job to investigate all the details. So right now they're turning on the narrative that was presented at trial, right? At trial, her lawyers presented that Kaylee accidentally drowned in the pool. That was what won this case for her. Now, not just her, but the investigator who was part of her legal team is turning on that narrative. So is he admitting that he didn't do his work back then and properly investigate and ask these questions? Because right now he's asking these questions for the first time. Why didn't you have this conversation with her during the trial? It's confusing to me. Not that she's just turning on the narrative from the courtroom, but him as well. And he was on the legal team. So he's saying, no, what we presented, what I found back then wasn't right. And now he's digging even more. But why didn't you have this conversation with her before, during the trial? Why are you learning for the first time that these are things that he did when she was younger? Why?
That is very confusing to me. On the assumption that he knows what he's doing, that he's a professional, I can only assume that he did ask, not all of the questions in detail because he didn't have this second theory, but he would have asked some general questions to see if there were other possibilities. He must have done, otherwise there'd be no difference in picking like a random person from a supermarket to come in and investigate. These are very basic elements. So I'm only assuming that she didn't really give him any information or answers or descriptions that would lead to any alternative narrative, which begs the question, why is he not suspicious? If I was an investigator, if I was a detective and I'd found something from interviewing, not a suspect, but interviewing a person involved in a case, and then after the trial, the story changed, I would be, it's possible that, new information comes to light, but if new information hasn't come to light, I'd be hugely suspicious of that person. So I get your skepticism. I get why that it's confusing. It seems like they're two people kind of grieving a sad situation together rather than him being an objective investigator of what happened.
Exactly, and I'm so glad you said that. I don't have a problem with your opinion changing. If you don't, then you're stubborn and you're stuck in your opinion, and I hate that. But new information changes your opinion. The stuff she's saying here would have been things she would have known at the time of the trial. She's not introducing anything that happened since then or anything that was discovered since then. This is stuff she would have known. So are you blatantly admitting that by not asking her these questions during the trial, you didn't do your job? And are you admitting that by changing your narrative now and having let the lawyers present that narrative during the trial, that you didn't do your job? Is that what I'm getting? It feels like that's what I'm getting.
Or are you now saying that she's giving you new bits of information that were pertinent to the trial that she didn't disclose to you at the time when she should have done?
Right. And if that's the case, why aren't you skeptical? Like you said, there's no path where he comes off as a credible investigator. Because either he didn't get all the information initially, or he's getting new information now that contradicts that stuff, and he's not, that red flag, that red investigator flag isn't going off on the back of his head. I know there are a lot of investigators who follow this channel, and I'm very thankful for that, and I've gotten so many great testimonials from a lot of them saying that a lot of this behavioral stuff has helped them improve their interviewing skills. But let me know in the comments, if you're an investigator, let me know in the comments, did this make sense to you? The fact that he's almost open about the fact that there are certain things he didn't ask her that would have been pertinent to the case back then. And he let the lawyers present something that now he's turning on without new information. The second thing, and I'm excited to share this with you, is this. If this is what happened, if this is the narrative, why the heck would he Google how to suffocate someone?
Yeah, actually, you're right.
Unless we go back to the CSI Miami, he's trying to frame her thing. After it happened, he's like, oh, I'm going to go on her account and search this on her password protected account, then go on MySpace to frame her, which is exciting. But again, it's like, it's not following the facts, it's following the conspiracy. Why would he have Googled that? This, as you said, this Google search was not something to cover up an accident. It was a how-to.
Yeah.
So why would he Google that?
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, I completely agree with you. The two things can't be correct. She can only have one type of accusation. She can only be alleging one thing or the other. You can't have both, can you? So yeah, I agree with you. It is very, very bizarre.
And here's the thing, she's not even alleging that he's framing her. She's alleging that those searches must have been him. He must have done those searches. And now she's saying he must have done this. The two can't coexist.
They can't.
But I want to end this video where we ended the last video, part 2, because Dr. Dawes, as you know, I was very stuck at the end of part 2 as to why she's shifting the narrative, because very often if someone's making something up or they're lying and there's a narrative that kind of works, they tend to latch onto that and go, yeah, let's go with this. It worked on the jury, I'm just going to go with this. But she turned on it. She turned on the narrative that worked. She turned on the narrative that won her the case. And now she's presenting something completely new, knowing it could be detrimental to her. And you had some amazing theories as to why that is. And I encourage the viewers to go back and watch part 2 to see what those really great theories were. But after that, as I was editing, thinking about it, and reading the very amazing comments from this amazing community that I love so much, I came to a realization. And that realization, and this is something a lot of you were hinting at, some of you said, and Dr. Dawes, I think you were also kind of headed in this path, and the realization was the following. If she sticks to that narrative of this was an accident, which is what won her the case, she's still a neglectful parent. And that doesn't work for her narcissism. The only narrative that works for her narcissism is to say, it was completely out of my hands. He took her, I wasn't aware. He did something, I wasn't aware. You still have to explain why you went on partying for a month, but she can live with herself a little bit more if the narrative that's out there is that she didn't have anything to do directly with the death. Because if it was an accident, she's still a shit parent.
So when you said all that, two phrases jumped out to me, one of which I'm sure we've used before, one of which I'm not sure if we have. So one is external locus of control. So people who are either antisocial or narcissistic are unwilling to take the blame. So everything's somebody else's fault. Everything is the situation they were put in. Number one. And number two is damage control. I think that she knows that it's a really bad look and that she can't really hide away because the case was so gained so much notoriety and she came out looking bad. A lot of people think she's guilty of the death of her daughter. And even if she's not, she comes out looking really bad as a neglectful parent. So it's almost like her ego is so fragile, she's so narcissistic that she seemingly seems to be saying things that might not be true. I don't know that definitively, but that's what it appears to me to be a great possibility, because she would rather do that and change the entire narrative and the perspective of the public than continue living in a life where other people will question her as a bad parent.
Yep, which goes right back to what you said at the end of the last video, which is she would almost rather risk not being believed if there's a chance that she comes off looking less bad. Yeah. So there it was, everyone. We have reached the end of our Casey Anthony Where the Truth Lies journey. This was amazing for me to hear Dr. Daz's opinions and to really explore more than just the behavior here and get insight as to why, given her narcissism, she does things the way that she does them. I think at the end of the day, we're pretty much in agreement that there's just so many inconsistencies. There's things that don't add up. So does that mean for a fact that we can know that she's guilty of taking Kaylee's life and doing something horrible? No. There's no amount of behavior or body language analysis that can tell us for sure exactly what she did. But I think we can pretty confidently state that there are too many inconsistencies here. Something is being concealed, and that with the same amount of ease that she was lying back then about certain things, she's still lying today about certain things. The extent of it, I don't think anybody can know. We can speculate, but there's just too many things that don't add up.